Welcome to STEM Talk.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
STEM Talk.
Welcome to STEM Talk, where we introduce you to fascinating people who passionately inhabit the scientific and technical frontiers of our society. Hi, I'm your host, Don Cornegas, and joining me to introduce today's podcast is the man behind the curtain, Dr. Ken Ford, IHMC's director and chairman of the double secret selection committee that selects all the guests who appear on STEM Talk.
Hello, Don. Great to be here. Today's interview is with Dr. Steve Chien, the technical group supervisor of the Artificial Intelligence Group and a NASA senior research scientist in mission planning and execution section at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. At JPL, which is based at the California Institute of Technology, Steve leads efforts in automated planning and scheduling for space exploration.
So in 2018, Steve and Ken were appointed to the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, which was an independent commission tasked with providing the President and Congress a blueprint for advancing AI and associated technologies to address future national security and defense needs of the U.S. The commission recently released a 756-page report, which found that the nation is unprepared to compete in a future that is enabled by AI and could soon be replaced as the world's AI superpower. And the report was 2 years in the making and offers strategies and recommendations to strengthen and also protect the nation's economy, technology, and also national security. In today's podcast, we talked to Steve about the report and what he learned over the past 2 years serving on the commission. In addition to heading up the AI group at JPL, Steve also is the lead for deep space robotic exploration for NASA. And for the past several years, he has worked on the Perseverance rover mission, which landed on Mars back in February and used an automated ground-based scheduling system called Copilot that Steve and his JPL colleagues developed.
Steve joined JPL more than 30 years ago and last year was named a JPL Fellow, an honor that recognizes those who have made extraordinary technical and institutional contributions to JPL over an extended period of time. He is a graduate of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where he earned a doctorate in computer science.
Before Ken and I get to our interview with Steve, we have some housekeeping to take care of. First, we really appreciate all of you who have subscribed to STEM Talk, and we're especially appreciative of all the wonderful 5-star reviews. As always, the Double Secret Selection Committee has been continually and carefully reviewing iTunes, Google, Stitcher, and other podcast apps for the wittiest and most lavishly praise-filled reviews to read on STEM Talk. If you hear your review read on STEM Talk, just contact us at stemtalk@ihmc.us to claim your official STEM Talk t-shirt.
Today, our winning review was posted by someone who goes by the moniker rovers123. The review is titled, Is It Love? The review is set to an ABAB rhyming scheme. The review reads, Our brains are teeming with neurons stored with life's great purse capacity. Don and Ken's musings add to the great store. Their guests are, without fail, intellects with great sagacity, and present information that is anything but a bore. I tune in with considerable anticipation and wait for the next nugget of gold, and can only describe my enjoyment as infatuation. And then it says parenthetically, with Dawn, STEM Talk is truly a marvel to behold.
Well, Ken, that's the second time we've had a poet submit a review. So thank you, Robski123, and thank you to all of our other STEM Talk listeners and the poets out there who have helped STEM Talk become such a great success.
Yes, that was a great review, Robski123.
I'm blushing.
Okay, and now on to our interview with Dr. Steve Chien.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
STEM Talk.
Hi, welcome to STEM Talk. I'm your host, Don Cornegas, and joining us today is Steve Chien. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
And also joining us is Ken Ford.
Hello, Don, and hello, Steve.
So, Steve, first of all, welcome. We're super happy that you can join us today, and we're looking forward to talking to you about the Perseverance rover and its mission that is underway as we speak. And of course, the 756-page report that you and Ken and other members of the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence recently sent to the President and Congress. But we're going to get started first. We'd like to give listeners a sense of your background. So, from what I understand, you grew up in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, where as a kid you played a lot of basketball, Dungeons and Dragons, and I understand also tried to reinvent decision theory. Is that right?
Yeah, that's actually correct. So as a kid, I was a typical kid. I loved to play a lot of sports, basketball and football, and I also ran. as a lot of kids then, I was very interested in Dungeons and Dragons and also different kinds of war games. And I was really fascinated by sort of the mechanisms that they use to determine things like with rolling dice and the different outcomes. And so I really was trying to understand what possible outcomes there were from rolling dice and how to sort of play the games better. And that extended from everything from war games to Dungeons and Dragons to even playing a lot of backgammon. And that's actually the origin of my interests in artificial intelligence, because there's a lot of overlap between decision theory and artificial intelligence and economics.
Absolutely. So then how did you end up as a computer science major rather than an economics major?
Well, as a kid, I was very interested in computers, although they weren't quite what they are now. I remember when my next door neighbor got a Sol computer, and we were very excited by it and trying to write different programs and learning to program it, around, let's say, seventh or eighth grade, which would almost be considered late nowadays. But I was very interested in software and computers, and there was a local program at the University of Illinois, where my father was a professor, and I continued to get interested in that. My father was an electrical engineering professor, and a lot of my friends, their parents were professors too. Like my two neighbors on the two houses next to me, one was a law professor and one was an economics professor. And I just grew up learning a lot and being very interested in all those kinds of topics. And so the interests in math and science were quite natural. And my interest in sports kind of merged with that. At that point in time, that was just kind of the start of all of these fantasy sports leagues. And we would study the statistics like mad and try and, figure out how to get an edge at playing all these different sports games where you would coach a team, whether it was football or basketball or baseball. And I played that quite a bit with my friends.
And is it true that you graduated from the University of Illinois with a bachelor's degree in computer science when you were 19?
Yes, that is true. It's kind of an interesting coincidence. I didn't really plan that. I just was taking classes my first year as an undergrad, and kind of the things fell into place. And so I was able to graduate a year early in about 3 years. I was also 1 year younger because I went to an accelerated high school, which was actually a university high school in Urbana-Champaign. It's again with a lot of the other kids there were children of faculty.
And we're going to jump ahead a little bit here, but what did you end up doing after getting your PhD?
So after I got my PhD, I actually went to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I thought that I would be there for 5 years and then go off to a university and follow the typical academic route. But instead, I got very interested in the applications of artificial intelligence to space exploration. And one thing has led to another. And I've been there now going on several decades. And so the fascinating thing for me there is that I've gotten to study a lot of science, learn a lot about volcanism, a lot about hydrology, a lot about formation of the solar system. And the one thing that I keep going back to at JPL is the search for life. And by that, I mean the search for life beyond Earth and within our solar system, to places like ocean worlds, like the sub-ice ocean on Europa, which is one of the moons of Jupiter, or plumes at Enceladus, one of the moons of Saturn, or even harder yet, to go to another star and search there for life. Because what's really more compelling? What's more a compelling question than, are we alone in this universe? Is there life elsewhere? Is there intelligent life elsewhere? And I firmly believe that artificial intelligence is critical to go and hunt for life in those places where we might have a spacecraft that would have to be on its own for weeks, or in the case of an interstellar mission, have to be on its own for decades, literally.
Given that you're motivated by the search for life, as you just described, what are your thoughts on the likelihood in our lifetime or the lifetime of our listeners in discovery of life apart from that on Earth?
That's a great question, Ken, and oddly enough, one that I get remarkably frequently. I kind of have two answers to that. One is a pragmatic answer, and then one is kind of like the answer that I'm hoping for. And the pragmatic answer is that it just seems to me not likely that we would find life in the immediate future just because going to these places is so hard. If we're looking at going to the sub-ice ocean on Europa, we have to fly to Jupiter, which is pretty hard. We have to land on Europa, which is harder. Then we have to melt through this ice crust, which might be 10 kilometers thick. That might even take a year or two. And then we have to explore this under ice ocean. And we're actually practicing things like that on Earth, how to explore underneath ice shells, underneath the ice shelf, the Ross ice shelf in Antarctica, because we want to study that to understand the effects of climate change on some of these pristine Antarctic environments. But it's very hard on Earth, much less to go to another planet and do that. So the pragmatic answer is I'm not holding my breath waiting for such a mission to happen in my lifetime. But if you look out 30, 50 years, it's just very hard to project. So I would have a hard time predicting. But if you ask me as an optimist and what I hope for, it's quite possible that we could hear some signals that might indicate to us that there could be somebody trying to contact us, which is a little different from going there and literally visiting them.
Yes, we recently had Pascal Lee, a planetary scientist from NASA Ames Research Center on STEM-Talk, and he discussed the search for intelligent life, so not just life, but intelligent life in our galaxy. And the discussion was interesting, and it centered around the Drake equation, which, as you know, is developed to produce a probabilistic estimate of the number of active communicative extraterrestrial civilizations in the Milky Way. Of course, a well-appreciated limitation of this equation is that several of the terms are impossible to assign an accurate value at this point. You know, they're sort of naturally and necessarily partly based on conjecture and speculation. Pascal was of the view that it is likely that this equation n equals 1, and that is that we're alone. We are the only example, in his view, most likely of intelligence in the galaxy. And when you look at the equation, of course, the equation might not represent the true probability. One would tend to agree with Pascal in this assessment, but unfortunately, it seems to me that it's at least as likely that in the future, the value of n will move towards 0, as it is in some future time that we'll find that it's really greater than 1. So it's an interesting equation to look at, and one can reflect on what n might actually be. But I think the real value of the Drake equation is sort of a roadmap for a sensible estimate of what would be needed to be discovered to assign values to the terms rather than the equation itself. And I wondered, given all this, what are your thoughts on the likelihood of intelligent life in the galaxy?
Well, I think your analysis is absolutely spot on. You know, the Drake equation, as maybe the readers know, is the product of a large number of terms. And the challenge is that because it's a product, in other words, you multiply all of them together, any one term can have an extreme dampening effect on the end result, right? And so to me, it's a structure to think about, exactly as you said, a structure to think about what are the obstacles to intelligent life. The challenge is that there are some terms there that we really have no idea. There are some terms, you know, what are the number of solar systems in the galaxy? What are the number of galaxies in the universe? Things like that you could actually measure. And how many of them have planets? How many of them, you know, we think might sustain life? There you're already getting into quite a bit of conjecture because it's quite possible that life can exist not as we know it, you know, not in this temperate zone of planets. And just we have no idea because our entire experience as humans is limited to this one planet to some extent. The other challenge is there's other terms in there that we're really just making up numbers for, which is what is the chance that a form of life would actually develop into civilization and intelligence. And those are things that we're really getting out into we're just putting in a term there. I don't really understand how we could possibly estimate that particular term.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so switch topics just a little bit here. Right now, as we speak, the Perseverance rover is maneuvering across the surface of Mars. So as the head of the Artificial Intelligence Group at JPL, which is NASA's lead for deep space robotic exploration, you've spent quite a bit of time working on the Perseverance rover. And I know that you were involved with Copilot, which is the rover's scheduling system. So can you talk a little bit about that specific work that you did on the rover?
Sure. And I'll start by saying why we need artificial intelligence on the Perseverance rover. So, one of the challenges in sending these explorers to all these other places besides Earth is that we don't really have a good model of how things are going to turn out. And driving around on Mars, we don't really know what we're going to see. And not only that, we don't know how long things are going to take. And so when we drive the rover from location A to location B, it could take a lot longer, a lot shorter than we thought. Anytime you interact with the physical environment, or if we try and place an instrument on a rock, we could fail, we could succeed, we could partially succeed. It could take 5 tries, it could take 1 try. And so the primary artificial intelligence that I've been working on is a scheduling system that allows the rover to reschedule when things take longer or shorter than we thought. And this is an incredible challenge because on the MSL rover, Curiosity, which has been on Mars for almost a decade now, activities vary wildly in terms of how long they take. So they could take 20% longer or 30% longer or 20% shorter than we originally thought. And so the idea is to make the rover smart enough. If things take longer than planned, it can rearrange the activities. If things take shorter than planned, it can rearrange the activities. And that might sound like it's easy, but it turns out it's quite hard because you don't want to adjust the activities in the wrong way and endanger your multi-billion-dollar rover or disrupt some science observation that the scientists have been planning for days. And so that's kind of at the heart of it. So that the rover has this software that helps it to understand when it's okay to move activities and when it's not okay to move activities and when it's okay to insert new activities.
The success so far of the Perseverance mission has rekindled discussion of sending humans to Mars. As we discussed earlier, we recently interviewed Pascal Lee, who heads up the Mars Institute. And interestingly, he believes that we need to take a rather measured approach to sending humans to Mars, and that first we should return with humans to the moon and use that to gain experience operating in space again, and then move on to Mars. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, there's kind of 2 answers to that question. There's one answer, which is if you want to understand the most science at Mars, how do you do that? And it's quite clear that we can understand a lot by having robots in an environment. But no matter how good our robots are, and certainly within the realms of current artificial intelligence, they're not as good as humans. If we have an actual geologist on Mars, they could conduct the science much more effectively. And there have been many studies that have shown this. However, it's extremely challenging to put a human on Mars, much less on the moon. And so I would give a kind of a nuanced answer to that. You definitely want to do robotic exploration first, but at some point you want to send humans. And then I think I'll let the scientists argue about what's the exact time when you need to start sending humans. As far as going to the moon first, it's absolutely the case that it's been 50 years since we sent humans beyond Earth orbit. Okay, so, the Apollo missions ended in the 1970s. And there is an immense industry and technology and experience that we do not have anymore. And so we want to practice use of that experience. And that makes perfect sense from an engineering standpoint. So I would support practicing that by sending humans to the moon. There was some talk about sending humans to an asteroid as well. There are many, many paths to regain that experience.
For sure. And the moon is a natural next destination, in my view.
So, Steve, let's transition and talk about the National Security Commission on AI report that you, Ken, and the other 13 commissioners spent more than 2 years helping draft. Can you tell us a little bit about the commission and also its members and purpose?
Well, first, let me say that it was a tremendous honor to serve on this commission. And it was quite remarkable. I felt that the commission was a microcosm of what makes the United States such an amazing country. We had quite a range of backgrounds. We had people from academia, we had people from industry, we had people with government experience. And to me, that's what's the best and the greatest about this country is people with very diverse backgrounds and very diverse interests and them coming together with a joint purpose. And to me, it was very important to bring together that group, because artificial intelligence is becoming central to so many aspects of our country and our everyday lives. And as well, national security, and both literally in the national security standpoint of our defense community, but also even our economic security. It's quite clear that artificial intelligence is going to change all aspects of our life and in ways that it's quite hard to even predict now. And so the country needs to get ahead of it and understand this, and that's a challenge.
So, most of the news coverage that I've seen to date seems to stress that the report makes the case that China is on the verge of replacing the US as the world's AI superpower. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that China is definitely threatening to become the leader in artificial intelligence. I would not say that it's a foregone conclusion that they will, but in the national security arena, you have to respect any credible threat. And it is absolutely a credible threat that China could surpass us because they have several strengths. They have a government that has committed to artificial intelligence in a way that the United States government has not thus far. And they have a combination of the civil and the national security apparatus. They're much more closely tied in China than we are here. And then the final thing is that a lot of the philosophy of their government is not the same as a traditional Western open free society. That gives them particular advantages in leveraging the technology, and it also means that they are more likely to use the technology in ways that us as a traditional open Western society might not approve of, including on our citizens and in an inter-country commerce.
STEM-Talk is an educational service of the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition, a not-for-profit research lab pioneering groundbreaking technologies aimed at leveraging and extending human cognition, perception, locomotion, and resilience.
In 2016, the National Security Agency was hacked, and some of the agency's cyber tools and code were leaked for any nation, cyber criminal, or terrorist to use. In 2017, Russia appeared to use some of these NSA cyber weapons that were leaked to shut down the Ukraine. One morning, as I understand it, Ukrainians suddenly were unable to withdraw money from ATMs or pay for groceries or gas or even watch TV in some cases, though I would argue that that's a good thing. This malware, which appears the Russians developed using this code that was taken from the NSA, inflicted billions of dollars of damage, not just overseas, but also in the United States. Our report we worked on states that the limited use of AI-enabled attacks that we've seen so far represents just the tip of the iceberg. Steve, can you give listeners a sense of the risks that we assess that we face in this new and developing AI-enabled world in the case of cyber?
Well, Ken, that's a fantastic question. It's absolutely clear, even independent of the report, that our world is becoming increasingly cyber intertwined, meaning that every aspect of our lives depends on computation and computers and the cyber world, whether that ranges from when I order something from a restaurant or the power grid system or the internet itself, or even I'm conducting financial transactions. And if you think about it, cyber is an incredible vulnerability. Why do you need to, go through all this expense to invade another country if you can effectively take down the country by attacking its cyber infrastructure? And likewise, artificial intelligence is the perfect tool to go and leverage in this cyberspace, this cyber war domain. And I think it's quite a bit more likely that we're going to see intensified conflicts in the cyber domain and in the information domain by, putting out fake news and disrupting another country through information and disinformation than we are actual shooting wars. Again, because it's harder to attribute it to the attacker, even if you catch them with some cyber smoking gun, I don't think the public understands those kinds of, indications the same way that they understand, boots on the ground and people, with guns invading a country. And AI is the ultimate tool in cyber because there's no cost to creating 500, 500,000, 500 million cyber agents in the same sense as there is in the physical world. In the physical world, to build 500,000 tanks, you have to pay actual money. You have to, have this whole infrastructure. In the cyber world, you can create these 500 agents and replicate them at almost no cost and then unleash them. And so they can go from servers someplace in some third country into the United States almost instantaneously. And the speed and scale that can be achieved in cyber makes it a perfect application for AI.
Indeed, and as you mentioned, Steve, it's very a low barrier to entry to cyber compared to traditional large-scale warfare. Not everyone can build an aircraft carrier. In fact, essentially one can build a competent aircraft carrier, but anyone with a little bit of computer science knowledge and training can be involved in a cyber war.
Yeah, and actually, even to additionally emphasize your point there, it's the ultimate asymmetric domain, right? Just the fact that we have such an advanced society with so many cyber reliances means we have exponentially more vulnerabilities.
Agreed. That's the first thing I've just built a new house. One of the first things I did was uncyber everything in the house.
So the commission report also details how AI will enable new levels of performance and autonomy for weapons systems. And this, of course, raises a number of ethical issues as well as strategic issues. And when it comes to the use of lethal force, how do we ensure that AI-enabled and autonomous weapons are used in reliable and appropriate ways?
That's an outstanding question. And the short answer is the same way that for any other tool that we have that the military or that our government uses, we have to have thoughtful people to develop policies. We have to have some oversight, both of the development and the operational usage of these technologies. I feel that people somehow believe that artificial intelligence is different from other technologies. And it kind of is, and it kind of isn't. It is in the sense that software is going to the domain of decision making to greater and greater extremes. But it's not like it's black and white that, artificial intelligence is doing these things completely differently from before. We routinely have software that screens applications for loans, that searches out fraud in different cases, and approves all of our credit card transactions. Increasingly, there is an AI component to that. And the true oversight of that has to be by thoughtful people. And then I would emphasize by thoughtful people who have the background in the technology to make reasonable judgments about what is an ethical and an unethical use of AI.
Yes, and it's a great answer, Steve. And it's important to point out that in defense, we have had autonomous and semi-autonomous weapons for a long time. They've changed now over the years, but they've been around a while. And the key, as Steve said, is really a thoughtful person with responsibility and authority authorizing its use in a specific application at a specific time. And this is much how war has always been conducted. For decades, the United States has led the microelectronics industry in many ways. But today, we're almost entirely reliant on foreign sources for the production, at least, of semiconductors that power the AI algorithms used for defense systems, as well as for everything else, really. How important is it for us to recommit the nation to rebuilding a state-of-the-art microelectronics infrastructure and capability back here at home? What do you think about that?
Again, this is, I think, a very good and a very challenging question. I think that we need to have a measured response to protect the integrity of our supply chains. And there's multiple reasons for that. One reason is that, if your supply chain is vulnerable to being withheld by your competitors, it's pretty sure that they're going to either do that or they're going to use their influence over them. That doesn't necessarily mean having completely independent production, let's say, in the continental United States. It may mean, forging partnerships with allies and ensuring that, we have specific capabilities. It may also be mitigated by having stockpiles, but it's absolutely the case that this is an issue, and that it's an issue that thus far, I would say, has not gotten the attention that it deserves.
Agreed.
So the commission in its report spent a lot of time focused on AI and the competitive challenges that we face from other nations. But I wonder if it's also important that we maintain our world standing as the overall technological leader beyond just AI. The report calls for strong national action to ensure that we are competitive in a world dominated by what can be regarded as, and this is kind of a quote, AI-associated technologies, such as biotechnology, quantum computing, 5G, robotics, and even microelectronics. So how do we go about that?
Well, that's a very good question. And I would say, more generally speaking, there are some technologies that a large number of people, I would say almost even a consensus of the people, are the technologies of the future. And you mentioned some of them, not just AI, but biotechnology, quantum computing, if it pans out, robotics. I think that if we want to maintain the United States' preeminence in the world, we have to be competitive and as dominant as possible in these technologies. And what that really means is a pipeline of the world's best talent. And that includes both homegrown talent in terms of educating our youth and motivating our youth and having them understand that these are the places to be in the future, as well as, pathways towards immigration and attracting and making sure that we have the kind of society that the best and the brightest of the world want to live in. One of my friends was posting on Facebook a few days ago statistics on the number of math Olympiad medals won by different countries. And I was commenting that, well, it's kind of interesting to see them. I'd like to see them posted per capita. And the United States looked quite good. But I replied to him, and I said, well, how many of those math Olympiad medals were won by immigrants or by children of immigrants, or how many generations of, were they in this country? So in some sense, the United States has benefited tremendously from cherry picking some of the world's best talent. And if we want to stay where we are, we should understand a little bit of that and understand how to continue to do so.
That's a good response, Steve. And, we both believe that it's critically important for us as a nation to get a sufficient proportion of our most talented kids interested in STEM generally. But I'm not sure that many people understand just how essential this is. It's trendy to tell everybody, we need more people in STEM. But we really need, as you were just saying, exceptionally talented people in STEM, and we need to nurture them and develop that talent. And I just can't stress that enough. And I know that you strongly agree with that.
Absolutely. I would absolutely double down on everything that you said there. I was fortunate that, I grew up in a household where my father was an engineer. And I would say that there was some expectation that a number of us would go on and follow in those footsteps. I will kind of laughingly say that in a family of 4 kids, however, 2 went into business and then 2 were more in engineering, actually both in computer science and research. So I would say, speaking in an engineer or STEM-centric world, that would only be a 50% hit rate. I will say that is kind of the American thing, though. In the United States, there's a lot of emphasis on people, going and starting your own business and starting your own company. And I can't say that I was completely immune to that, because I've been involved in starting up several companies as well. But I think that we do have to understand that STEM and mathematics and science is really, at the basis of a lot of the modern society that we take for granted. We're standing here in the United States in the middle of this incredible rollout of COVID vaccines. And I'm pretty sure that when we look back on this decades from now, this will be seen as one of the most incredible scientific and technological achievements of our lifetime, to get to multiple effective vaccines in a little more than a year. And it's just an incredible thing to see. My wife is a biologist and a virologist, in fact. So I'm fortunate to hear even more of it. But, that's the kind of thing that hopefully people will understand and appreciate the value of this in creating this kind of society that we all want to see.
So, Steve, I understand that you particularly think that we need to get more kids as well as adults interested in statistics. Is that right?
That's absolutely the case. And I can't say that I'm anything close to the only person on this front. Stephen Dubner, of Freakonomics fame, has often railed on this topic. In fact, he's talked about how his high school daughter should be learning, more about statistics and what I would call practical statistics rather than higher level calculus or something like that, which I think is only really useful if you're going to be an engineer, maybe you're a physicist. And in particular, it's amazing to me how little people understand about how to draw conclusions from statistics. Let me tell a little story. Recently, I was studying which vaccine to consider going and getting because, we're in this great situation in California where when they open the floodgates, you can actually select which vaccine you get from COVID. And so I went and read the phase 3 trial data, and it's remarkable some of the details that you're very interested in that they leave out in these releases. For example, they say that, well, we tested it in these 3 countries, in Brazil and South Africa and the United States, but then they don't tell you how many samples were in each of those 3 arms of the study. And what could be more important than, the relative sizes of those studies, particularly if you're like me and you're kind of interested in how effective it was against the South African variant of COVID. And so these are the things that I think, when people read about polling, when they read about political polling, when they read about, this many people thought X and Y, these are obvious questions that should be popping up in people's minds. And so people ought to understand when, things are being misquoted, how to get to what's the step beyond the headline of the news article, and then even to understand different statistics when they're going and looking for a mortgage or, managing their own finances. I think that's practical mathematics. And then in the future, as artificial intelligence is going to be leveraging all of the statistical knowledge to make decisions, it's has to be humans that have outrage when, the artificial intelligence is being misused. People need to understand that. Non-AI people need to understand that because by and large, the majority of lawmakers in the public who are making these decisions are not AI experts. And I don't have the best confidence that necessarily the lawmakers and the decision makers will simply take the word of the experts. And so we have to have a greater understanding by everybody.
For sure. And you mentioned 2 things, lawmakers and media. And essentially, in most cases, the lawmakers receive their views from the media and quote statistics found in the media. And the media rarely gets the statistics right. And I often wonder, do they not understand basic, simple statistics, or do they assume that we don't understand them? But if you cannot read a newspaper article. It's very hard with one with substantial statistics in the article and not cringe.
Well, I would say not even substantial statistics, even basic statistics. I very recently, in the last week, I read this article where these 2 points were being confused. They had some preliminary Pfizer vaccine data, and there were really 2 separate facts that are in the study release. One is that 90%, 6 months from the vaccine, there's still a 90% efficacy of the vaccine. So that's one fact. And then the second fact is in the arm of the study where they studied it against the South African variant, there were no hospitalizations or illnesses in the Pfizer vaccinated subarm. And the news article smashed those 2 facts together and said 90% accuracy in the South African arm, or at least implied that. Mm-hmm. And it was absolutely incorrect.
Yeah, you see that over and over.
Yeah, and then I saw this in a JPL Slack channel where somebody basically read the headline and stated that, and I was like, "Did you read the article?" and this is an engineer, hopefully. So I'm like, "Come on."
One of the worst abuses of statistics takes place in pharmaceuticals and in medicine generally. Where you often see relative risk and absolute risk confounded. And so somebody will see a 400% increase in X when the increase is from 1 to 3. The the actual absolute risk is often small.
Yeah. Absolutely. But, given that I would say in this country, the people who rigorously understand the difference between budget deficit and national debt is not as large as it should be. That's a troubling thing, right?
Yeah.
It is.
I definitely agree with you on that. Well, Steve, earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that you had a very diverse range of interests when you were growing up. So we're kind of curious here, when you're not working on a 756-page report about the impact of AI on national security or working on Mars rover missions, what is it that you do in your spare time now?
Well, I would say during the pandemic, I'm quite cooped up, so it's not clear that I have that much other time. But I would say pre-pandemic, I really enjoyed traveling all around the world. It's kind of a bizarre evolution in my life because when I was a kid, I would say I did not have this huge desire to travel, and it kind of evolved because of my job. I had to travel a lot, and then I went to the attitude of, well, while I'm here, I might as well learn something and try and learn something about this country that I'm in. And now it's gone to the other extreme where I would say that I'm quite a planner. And a lot of my time is spent planning elaborate trips to all around the world, although that's going to be curtailed a little bit in the post-pandemic world. So I really enjoy traveling and seeing, just how different things are. And I think that's given me a great appreciation for how fortunate I am that my parents immigrated and had the opportunity to immigrate to the United States, because as a U.S. citizen, we are entitled to so many things. There's so many things we take for granted, that we have a mostly functioning government, that we have a police system that generally, is not quite, is doing its job especially compared to other countries. And if you ask yourself the question, what other country would I consider moving to? Because, as a technical person, I would have a lot of mobility. The answer is, I don't really want to go in another place. I love the United States. And I think it's my travels that have kind of led me to that conclusion, particularly having spent some time in the developing world.
Well, Steve, it's been fantastic having you on STEM Talk, and we really enjoyed our conversation with you today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for having this podcast. I think it's a tremendous service and tremendous thing that you're doing. I think it's very important to help to have, larger portions of the population understand the beauty of STEM and how it's such an amazing thing.
Thank you, Steve. It was wonderful to have you on.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
Well, Ken, Steve is definitely an interesting fellow, and I hope the National Security Commission on AI report isn't one of those studies that sits on a shelf and gathers dust. Anyone listening to you and Steve can tell that we definitely face a serious threat as a country if we don't expand our research and development of AI and other associated technologies.
You're right, Don, and I think you can feel confident that this report will do more than gather dust and that many of the recommendations will be acted on. One of the main goals of the report was to lay out an actionable path to enhance our nation's position in an AI-enabled future. But it's important to realize that you can't just flip a switch and all of a sudden elevate our AI capacities. This is going to take a long, steady commitment and hard work over a long period of time to bring these capabilities to fruition.
So if you enjoyed this interview as much as Ken and I did, we invite you to visit the STEM Talk webpage where you can find the show notes for this and other episodes at stemtalk.us. We will include a link to the NSCAI report in our show notes, just by the way. This is Dawn Carnegie signing off for now.
And this is Ken Ford saying goodbye until we meet again on STEM Talk. And by the way, don't send the report to your printer.
Yeah, 756 pages
You'll be
later.
sorry.
Thank you for listening to STEM Talk. We want this podcast to be discovered by others, so please take a minute to go to iTunes to rate the podcast and perhaps even write a review. More information about this and other episodes can be found at our website, stemtalk.us. There, you can also find more information about the guests we interview.